All right, today we're going to go through Workout Wednesday, week 17. Can you switch between KPIs? I did it a certain way. A lot of people did a lot of different things. I saw some parameter actions. I saw some different usage of parameter actions in different variations. I'm going to use set actions, and let's walk through it. So start off, we need a metric. So you notice we have games, hits, and so on. We need something to be able to choose between these, but this doesn't actually exist in the data set. So what I'm going to do is create a calculated field and call it metric. And when I do this, I'm just going to use a value that has 5 items in it. So in this case, year. So I'll do when it's 2021, then I want it to be hits. When 2020, make it games. Actually, I want games first, then hits. When 2019, then hits per game. When 2018, home runs. And when 2017, at bats per home run. And end. I saw Rosario Gaona do a calculation based on the year. So it was like a year, and I can never remember what this is called with the %5, but basically this is going to give you the remainder whenever you divide by 5. And then she added 1 to that, because if you have a 0 remainder, you want it to be 1, and that gave her 1 through 5. That was a really interesting one that I saw. I need thens here instead of equal signs. Starting off really well here so far. All right, there we go. So now if I bring this metric over to columns, I have each of these. I'm gonna exclude the nulls. And I can reorder these, so I want a bats per home run to go after. There we go. So now I need to get these boxes. And so for that, I'm just going to do a double click up here in rows and do min of 1, not 10, 1. And that gives me a bar. If I expand this out to the entire view, I can edit the axis to go fixed from 0 to 1. Turn that show header off, and I have my bars. I can even increase the size a little bit to close that gap. And then I will turn this header off, and I'll drag that to label, and now I have games, hits, each of them labeled here. We can move the alignment to the top left, and we'll play with the size of that here in a second. So the next thing I need is the number of games, hits, etc. for each of these players. And what we need to do, we'll need to create a hits per game and an at bats per home run metric. So we can do that here really quick. Let's call it hits per game. And that's going to be the sum of hits divided by the sum of games. And at bats per home run is just the sum of at bats divided by the sum of home runs. So now we have each of those. And what we need to do is get each of those to show up here. So if I drag in at bats per home run into the label, that's going to give me the total for both of them, and I need something separate for each one. And I also need to be able to have it calculate across. So what I'm going to do, I've already created that calculation here, so I'll just bring it in and talk through it. So basically I'm saying if the player equals Cabrera, then if that's true, I want to use a case on the metric value that we created from those. So when it's hits, then I want the sum of hits fixed at the player level, and so on for each stat. So for hits per game, I actually need to calculate that specifically here, fixed to get the sum of hits fixed at the player level, divided by the sum of games fixed at the player level. And same thing with the bats and home runs. So then once I have all of those, that's if the player equals Cabrera. If the player does not equal Cabrera, then I want them to be null. And you'll notice that I have these negative numbers in front of hits per game and at bats per home run. That's going to allow me to give those a different number format, and I'll go through that here in a second. So we've got Cabrera. We'll click OK, right click and duplicate, and then just change this to be Pujols. Now I can bring in Pujols to label and Cabrera to label. Okay, and those actually aren't coming in because I named things differently. So we need all caps because I was making it look all fancy. So now if we do that, we get some numbers. And let's check our at bats per home run. That's going to be this. Edit. Change that, and there we go. And we need to show this header again so that we can move this down to this end. Then we'll uncheck show header. Okay, so you notice once again we have these -1 and -16 and -19. So I'm going to highlight both of these, right click, default number format, and we're going to go with a 2 decimal place number. So I want that to be my default. But with a positive number, I just want it to be a whole number for games, hits, and home runs. But for a negative number, I want it to have that decimal place, but I don't want it to be a negative number. So now when I do that, I get decimal places here and whole numbers here. So I'm going to turn the tooltips off, and I will format this a little bit, make this one bigger. Add a name label here, Pujols Cabrera. Make these both 11, medium, and then Pujols I want to be red, and Cabrera I want to be dark blue. And I didn't actually put these colors into the requirements. So a lot of people just matched them up. This is actually St. Louis Cardinals red and Detroit Tigers blue for their main teams that they've played with. Okay, so now I need to color these. And so I need a gray if it's not selected and this teal green if it is selected. So that's where my sets came in. So I went to metric, create a set. Let's select games for now. Click OK. Bring that set out to color. So I have one color for the one that's in it and another color for the one that's out of it. So I'm going to go back and get those colors that I said selected is this one. And I can just double click here and double click and that gives me my hex. And then this one I need to be this. Okay, so now I have my teal and my gray. And then for a little bit later, I want this to actually be about 75% opacity. Actually, maybe 85%. All right, so now I've got my bars or my squares with the totals. I didn't filter out 2022. Miguel Cabrera actually just passed 3,000 hits, so I wanted that to show here. And we will call this select metric. And then I'm just going to go to the title, change this to italics, and there we have select metric. All right, so the next thing I need to do is create this chart that switches based on each of these being selected. So when I click on games, it switches to games, hits, and so on. So what we'll do is create a calculated field that is selected metric. I'm going to copy this one in as well, just from a quick standpoint. So what I've said is if this is the metric set, so I've created that set that highlights the color already. So if it's in the metric set, then I want that metric. And I want the value of the metric, otherwise null. Now, because these are based on years, they're not on every row of the data set. So then I need the fixed min of that to give me overall what is that metric at the whole data set level. So that will give me games, hits, home runs, at bats, etc. And then for later on, I need this to be an aggregate. So I need it to be a min. Now, once I have that, I can do the selected values. So we'll create a new calculated field, we'll come in, another case statement based on that selected metric. So when it's that selected metric, when it's games, then I want the sum of games, hits, home runs, and so on. So this is why I needed it to be min, because each of these are all aggregate calculations. And so if I didn't have it as a min, then I would get the lovely cannot mix aggregate and non-aggregate functions error. So that gives us our metric value. Create a new sheet, bring that out here, bring year to, year to columns. And I actually want this to be a discrete year. just so it's nice and clean. Make it a line. Bring in our player onto color. And I want to exclude 2022, just because we're 3 weeks into the season, not enough numbers down there for them to worry about. So we'll hide that indicator, hide the field labels, take off the metric value, and I'm going to format the workbook to get rid of grid lines. All right, and then I need to set my player colors. I thought I already had these colors set. Okay, now we want to label, but I want the labels to be formatted like we did before. So I'm actually just going to duplicate this metric value, edit, and we'll call this metric label. And then I want the hits per game and the at-bats per home run to be negative. Then we'll format this just like we did the other ones. So start with 2 decimal places, take the 2 decimal places off there, take the negative off the negative number. So then when I add metric value or metric label to label, and then I can do min max on the line, and then I get the min and the max for each line. So that gives us this. We'll call this metric values. Now we need to see if this changes as we change the set. That wasn't the one that I wanted. Want to show the set. So if I switch to hits, at-bats per home run, home runs, and you can see with the at-bats per home run, I have formatted with decimals. Okay, so now we've got both of those. We can actually start our dashboard now. We're going to do 1000 by 900. Bring in a vertical. Bring in my select metric and my select values. Get rid of all of that extra stuff. And what I want here in this header, I want to be able to show the selected metric. So I'm just going to add that to tooltip, and that makes it so that I can insert it up here in the title. So now I've got at-bats per home run, games, etc. All right, so we'll come back over here. I'm going to shortcut the title, not make you watch me type it all. Put that in here. This one I don't need it to be this big, so I'll make it a little shorter. So now that one's a fixed height. Make that a fixed height. And this one can just expand as it needs. All right, so now the only thing that we're missing are these thumbnail views. So in order to do that, we're just going to take one I'm actually going to start with this metric values and duplicate it. We'll call this hits. Drag hits up over the top of metric value. That gives me the hits. We're going to take the labels off. And we don't need the selected values. And I don't want either of these headers because I just want the lines. Just want the spark lines. All right. So this is hits. Duplicate. Actually, before I do that, I want to turn the tooltips off on this. Do that on this one too. Games. Switch out games for hits. Hide the header. Duplicate again. Home runs. Throw home runs out here. Uncheck show header. 2 more. Bats per home run. And hits per game. All right, so now how do we get these to show up here? I generally don't go floating, but in this case, I had to. So, toss this up here, hide the title, get rid of the legend, drop it up here. Doesn't quite look how we want it. So what we need to do is format this, go to the paint, make it a transparent worksheet. That does make it work, but in this particular case, I have it behind because I don't want you to be able to click on the sparkline. I want you to click on the box that's going to actually make the action work once we get to that point. So here, this would allow me to click on these lines, and that's not what I want. So I want this to go to the back. So if I try that and send it to the back, nothing happens. That's because in my layout, I usually just leave the tiled along with my containers. But I have my vertical container, and this is the horizontal that it added when it put all of the legends and things on the right hand side. So I can remove that container, and then I can remove this tiled container, and then I have the vertical. And if I send this games to the back, now it's also still gone. Once again, I need to format this worksheet to not have a background so that it becomes transparent, and there you go. That's why I did the opacity at 85% so that it could get to be shown here. All right, so now just some fine tuning on this one. Bring things down, that's what I forgot with these headers was to not include 0. So we'll do that real quick for each of these. This would have been easier to do before I unchecked show header for all of them, but we'll make it work. Okay, so now it uses that whole space that I've got. Something that I tend to do is make these, like the width I'll go to 170 and height I'll go to 120. Just to kind of get things consistent. So then when I'm bringing in the next one, I know I want it to be 170 by 120. So I'll bring in hits, hide the title, hide the legend, 170 by 120. Format. And actually, I can copy the formatting from hits now and paste the formatting to these. So that should hopefully take care of that piece. So bring in home runs over here. Get rid of that, get rid of that. 120 by 170. Nope, that was backwards. 170 by 120. Hits per game. It's 70 by 120. And bats per home run. Make that one 170 by 120. All right, and then we will send each of these to the back. Okay. So now I need clicking on these to actually make the set change. So that's a pretty straightforward I don't know why this is still selecting, but we'll see. Oh, because I'm looking at the wrong one. All right, so we go to Dashboard, Actions, Add Action, Change Set Values. And I only want it to happen when I'm clicking on Select Metrics. So I'll shift click those, turn them off. My target set is the metric set. When I do that, I want to assign that value to the set. When I clear the selection, I want to keep that value so that it doesn't change. All right, so now if I click on games, color changes to games. Hits per game, home runs, at-bats per home run. Now, the one last thing that I need to worry about is when I click on this, it stays selected unless I deselect it. And when it's selected, it doesn't actually show me the sparkline. But I want it to show me the sparkline, and I don't want it to do all of these. So to take care of that, we'll go back to this sheet, create 2 more calculated fields. If you've been around Workout Wednesday very much at all, you'll be familiar with this technique. I just create a true and a false. Add both of those to my detail. You'll notice it flashed, but nothing actually changed. And then from the dashboard, I can go to Actions, Add Action, Filter, and on Select, in Select Metric, I want to target the sheet Select Metric. And when I clear the selection, I want to show all values. I want to do this where false equals true, which is never the case, so it's never going to filter, and it's always going to show all values. So now when I click on hits per game, it doesn't highlight, it stays the same, and it adjusts. And that's it. Hopefully that's helpful. Once I've figured out set actions, it really is a nice technique for something like this. You can do this for a number of different metrics, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it.